Let's move on to the stock ban. Let's put this up there on the screen, Data for Progress poll, which is that would you support or oppose Congress passing a bill that would ban members of Congress from buying or selling stocks while in office? Support, 74%. Oppose, 19%.
Who are those 19%?
Yeah, I want to meet these 19%. Who are you? Members of Congress and your families? People who work in the defense industry? What's happening
People
here,
who
okay?
are following Nancy Pelosi's stock trades and making a lot of money.
People who are making
like,
money by
this is
following
a good gravy
insider trading. That's very, very smart. But for real though, and I've said it before, I have not seen a groundswell online movement, actually become fruition in terms of seeing members of Congress actually seriously work towards this end in a really long time. I mean, this is a real thing that started out because those guys like Unusual Whales were making it, transparent and effective for people like us to air it on our show and bring to light, these outrageous trades that the Pelosi family, that the Republicans were doing about how many members of Congress were beating the S&P 500 when guys on Wall Street who are billionaires don't even beat the S&P 500. As we said, I met some of these folks. They're not smart. They are truly not sending their best here to Congress. And, when you see those results, it doesn't take a genius in order to figure it out. And the best part about the current bipartisan push is that it is forcing people to get on the record, and even better, forcing members of Congress to try and get as out front and co-sponsor and more in order to appeal to you, because you know that this is corrupt as hell. So let's put this up there. So there's been more movement here. Jon Ossoff's bill to ban members of Congress, that's Brian Schatz from Hawaii. I just checked yesterday. Patty Murray from the state of Washington also said that she would go ahead and co-sponsor the bill.
That's great.
Now, that bill is going to move through, I think it's going to move fairly quickly, but look, here's the way it works. It gets moved out of committee or whatever, but from that point, then what happens? Then the roadblocks and the amendments, and then will it actually get moved from the committee to the floor? Will they give it the floor time in order to vote? Then will they move it on to the House? Will the House try to amend it? And by that time, they're going to try and add in every exception known to man and quietly kill this thing. So we have to focus on every inane piece of parliamentary procedure. Right now, the bill has been created. Eventually, it has to move its way through the committee system. We'll cover the hell out of it here. From there, it then has to, be presented with amendments, scored, etc. Then it will move on to the floor. Then will they actually bring it to a vote? This is the other thing that we need to do. We need to make sure to keep the groundswell, because right now they can see that they're scoring a lot of points by introducing the bill, co-sponsoring it or whatever. Like I said, Josh Hawley also has his own version. Representative Chip Roy, another Republican in the House, he's representing the House version. So there is bipartisan support for this stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the Libertarian members of Congress also were to support this thing as well. But we need to get them on the record, and we need to check as to actually what's happening. They could actually do this. They could do this, it would take them 2 weeks if they really wanted to.
Yeah, of course, Nancy Pelosi, her effort to stop any movement in this direction and say, we're going to beef up penalties on the Stock Act, which all that the Stock Act does is provide transparency, which has been useful for us to be able to work with something, and for Unusual Whales to be able to run the numbers and give us some data that also Business Insider crunched the numbers on. I mean, that has been useful, but she wants to pretend like, I'm totally on board with that. Let's just up the penalties, when no, that's wildly insufficient. We're way beyond that. Now we just need to end the practice, period. End of story. I also want to say, yes, there are Republicans who are coming out with their own proposals, but it's pathetic that no Republican has signed on to Jon Ossoff's measure. And the reason is because they see this as a political winner. They want to play games, but they don't want anything to actually pass under Democrats. They want to be able to say, we're going to do it once we ultimately win the majority. So again, Democrats have a wide open opportunity here to put Republicans in a very tough spot. Okay, Kevin McCarthy. Okay, Josh Hawley.
Yeah, bring it to the floor.
Okay, Chip Roy, you said, you're on board with this, so here's the bill. Let's vote up or down and see where you actually stand on prohibiting members of Congress from trading stocks, and see what happens. And, maybe they ultimately fold to the pressure. Maybe they don't. Either way, that would ultimately be a win. And there is literally no argument against doing this except corruption.
Yeah,
I mean, that is ultimately what it comes down to. But to your point, the fact that you've had this online swell of support and interest and so much heat around this topic, and now legislation starting to be crafted and people trying to position themselves. Jen Psaki got a question at the podium about whether President Biden actually supports these moves or not. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
Does the president think that members of Congress should be prohibited from trading stocks? The president is prohibited from doing this, so where does he stand on this, and should their spouses be too?
The president didn't trade individual stocks when he was a senator. That is how he approached things. He also believes that everyone should be held to the highest standard, but he'll let members of the leadership in Congress and members of Congress determine what the rules should be.
Abdication of any sort of leadership there, obviously.
Okay.
Kind of
Say
indicating,
you support it.
Kind
Say
of indicating like, yeah, I'm kind of on board with the sentiment of here, but it's up to Congress to set the rules of their body. You were in Congress for a long time. You can certainly have an opinion and press them on this one.
Also, I don't think, first of all, whenever it comes to Joe Biden, may not have traded individual stock, but had some really sketchy stuff whenever it came to his own personal finances that we don't necessarily
We talked to Ryan Grim about his brother and all of that.
His brother, his house, which he just happened to sell for a very large profit. But I think this is important because that Psaki quote came after the White House economic advisor, Brian Deese, had appeared to endorse that legislation. So in a way, Psaki is walking this back from joining Squawk Box, a couple of days ago, saying that this would restore faith, quote, in our institutions, and now just saying, well, it's up to Congress. So I just happen to wonder, did the Democratic leadership call the White House and say, hey, don't say a damn word whenever it comes to this bill? Why did one senior White House official seemingly endorse this thing? And then days later, they're like, well, that's up to them. Why don't you just endorse it from the podium? Just be like, yes, the president supports this legislation and hopes he passes it. He's willing to do it for both. He's willing to go to the frickin' Congress to try and push voting rights legislation, which doesn't have a chance in hell. Why doesn't he throw his weight behind something
that
like this?
That actually could pass.
It could pass. We have bipartisan versions. As you said, okay, let's see if people are full of it. Bring it to the floor. Let it get 60 votes. I would love to see every Republican vote against this thing. Truly, because it would just show that they're completely full of it. And even Democrats too. I want to see them vote.
Force them to actually do a talking filibuster.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
About keeping the ability for members of Congress to trade on inside information. I would love to see that. Nothing could be better for Democrats than for once being on the right side of a populist, clear-cut, anti-corruption issue. And the fact that they don't do it, again, there's no argument for it except for corruption. In terms of the leadership in the House and the Senate, Schumer has demurred. He just won't say what his position is ultimately. Pelosi, of course, made those obnoxious comments about how, it's a free market and people should be able to participate in that. It is the opposite of a free market to be trading on inside information, okay? That is not what a free market ultimately is if you're into such things. Hakeem Jeffries, who's widely seen as her successor, he was happy when Kevin McCarthy said basically like, we're going to do our version of this if the GOP takes the House. He was happy to slam McCarthy as not credible on the issue. But then when they were like, all right, so where do you stand on it? He had nothing to say. He wouldn't answer the questions. So not a great look for them. Good on Jon Ossoff and others for getting out front on this issue and pressing the case and making it a little uncomfortable. And if Democrats had half of a brain cell and were like slightly less corrupt, they would take advantage of this rather than just crying about their bad midterm prospects. They'd rather ultimately lose than actually do anything to deliver for the American people or to restore faith in our institutions to try to bolster their chances.
Also, just think of the layup, Krystal. If the House leadership and the Senate leadership, if Schumer and Pelosi let this thing die, then Kevin McCarthy and Hawley and them are going to look like heroes if they actually get it done. Or if they introduce it and then force them to vote against it. Can you imagine the popular groundswell, or to force the Democrats to filibuster that legislation? That's the greatest thing that could ever happen to them. Which they easily could do. Consider if the House and the Senate go Republican, they could send that legislation to the president's desk. Then what? The president is gonna veto or not sign a Republican-led bill? I'm gaming this out, and frankly, I think that's probably the most likely scenario at this point.
And it's not just Republicans who would be put on the spot if Democrats brought something like this to the floor. Okay, Joe Manchin. You claim you're just representing the interests of West Virginia. All right, how about on this one?
What about Mark Warner?
How about on this one?
He's worth like $500 million.
He's a very wealthy man.
Yeah, he's a very, but no one has yet explained to me how exactly he made all of this money.
You all have seen the list that Unusual Whales compiled of who is beating the market. We got another one in the show today, Dan Crenshaw, who's done
doing very well.
One of the top performers in terms of Congress. Where do you stand
Interesting.
on this bill, Congressman? What do you think about all this?
So a man who's got no real world experience, was in the military, then got elected to Congress, and all of that, is the 5th best performing person in terms of a stock portfolio, outbeating some of the best private equity funds in the history of Wall Street. I got it. Okay. Yeah. So high frequency traders, algorithms, and all that. Dan Crenshaw. He's very good at what he does. Yeah, that's interesting. We'll talk about that. Don't worry.
Interesting. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut. Our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions. All that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.